Wherever you are tonight, let this place settle around you. It is the year 1652, on the open grassland of the Great Plains, in a season when the cold arrives early and stays. The wind moves low across dry grass, and the light is already fading toward evening. Here, in a quiet camp circle, a tipi is being raised, its poles lifted into a tripod, its frame anchored to the frozen ground, its hide drawn down slowly until the shelter takes its rounded shape. Later, inside, a small fire will be coaxed to life from sparks and dried fungus until it settles into a steady, low burn. None of this asks anything of you. There is nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to follow. The work happens in its own unhurried time, one motion after another, the same way it has happened for a very long time. You can simply rest here in the cold air and the slow firelight, and let the evening continue without you. The final assembly of the frame begins in the late afternoon of a day when the prairie wind moves with a steady, unbroken force across the open grassland. The poles, now thoroughly dried and lightened by days of vertical seasoning, rest in a loose bundle near the edge of the camp circle. The man selects the 3 primary foundation poles first, verifying their straightness by running his hand along the length of each trunk. The surface is smooth, cool to the touch, and carries the faint, dry scent of cured pine resin. He positions the butt ends on a flat patch of earth, aligning them in a wide triangle that mirrors the natural distribution of weight across a standing base. The tips remain together, lashed securely with braided bison sinew that has been allowed to dry and shrink, tightening the knot into a rigid, unyielding apex. He stands at the center, placing both hands against the bound tips, and begins the slow upward lift. The poles rise as a single unit, their weight distributed evenly across his shoulders and palms. There is no sudden movement, only a gradual, controlled elevation until the tripod stands fully vertical, its legs spreading outward to form a stable, 3-pointed structure.
The sound of the wood settling into the soil is a low, muffled thud, followed by the quiet creak of the sinew lashing, adjusting to the new tension. The wind continues to pass through the tall grasses, but the frame holds steady, rooted by the careful balance of its geometry. The man steps back, observing the alignment, ensuring that the crossing point remains level and the base spreads evenly. There is no need to adjust further. The structure has found its natural equilibrium. The air around the tripod remains cool, carrying the dry, mineral scent of the prairie soil and the faint, resinous aroma of the seasoned wood. He returns to the remaining poles, lifting them one by one and sliding them into the spaces between the primary legs, adding mass and stability to the circular framework. Each pole is placed with deliberate care, its tip resting against the bound apex, its butt anchored firmly in the earth. The rhythmic sequence of lifting, positioning, and settling continues until the full conical shape emerges, a skeletal outline of the shelter waiting for its covering. The work proceeds without interruption, guided by repetition and the steady cadence of placement. The frame stands complete, silent and unchanging, ready for the next phase.
The second phase involves securing the base of the poles to prevent shifting under sustained wind pressure. The man gathers a series of thick, hand-carved wooden stakes, each approximately 18 inches in length, tapered to a blunt point to avoid splitting the dry prairie soil. He kneels beside the first pole, positioning the stake at a slight outward angle against the trunk, and strikes it with a smooth, heavy mallet fashioned from a dense oak limb. The sound is a dull, resonant thud, a low-frequency impact that travels through the ground and into his knees. He drives the stake until it sits flush against the earth, then repeats the process for each leg of the structure. The sequence is methodical, moving clockwise around the structure, each strike measured and consistent. The tactile feedback is steady. The wood of the stake meets the packed soil with a firm resistance, settling into a secure position without buckling or sliding. He checks the tension by pressing lightly against the frame, feeling the even distribution of force across the base. The wind shifts slightly, moving from a straight cross flow to a gentle diagonal, but the structure remains immobile, anchored by the carefully placed stakes. The air grows cooler as the sun begins to lower, casting long, pale shadows across the prairie. The man stands slowly, brushing a fine layer of dry soil from his trousers, and steps back to observe the completed framework. The conical shape is uniform, the poles evenly spaced, the base secure against the ground. He considers the weight of the hide covering that will soon be drawn over this skeleton, recognizing that the stability of the base will determine how evenly the tension distributes across the seams. There is no urgency to proceed. The frame will wait, steady and unchanging, while he prepares the covering for the final lift. The camp remains quiet, the only movement coming from the slow drift of grass seeds across the open ground and the distant, low hum of wind passing through the sage. The work continues in its own unhurried time, guided by repetition and quiet attention. As the light softens into the pale gold of early evening, the man prepares the final adjustments to the frame before introducing the cover. He moves to the apex, checking the sinew lashing for any signs of loosening or uneven tension. The braided cord remains tight, its fibers compressed by days of drying, holding the poles together with a quiet, unyielding strength. He runs his fingers along the crossing point, feeling the smooth, cured texture of the wood beneath the binding. The tactile sensation is consistent, firm, and cool, with no visible gaps or misalignments. He shifts his attention to the lower sections, running his hands along the inner surfaces of the poles to ensure there are no rough spots or protruding knots that might catch or tear the hide. The wood is uniformly smooth, the result of careful scraping and seasoning, its surface polished by the dry winds and the repeated handling of the preparation process. He steps inside the frame, his boots settling softly against the packed earth, and looks upward toward the bound apex.
The converging lines of the poles create a narrow, focused opening to the sky, a deliberate design that will allow smoke to escape while keeping the interior sheltered from rain and wind. The thought arises that this space, though empty and open to the air, already holds the shape of a home, defined not by walls, but by the careful arrangement of wood and tension. He exits the frame, his movements slow and deliberate, and gathers a small bundle of dry sage and cottonwood bark to place near the base, a quiet preparation for the evening fire that will eventually burn within. The air around the structure remains still, carrying the faint, clean scent of dried grass and seasoned pine. The man sits on a low wooden stool beside the frame, watching the slow descent of the sun and the gradual lengthening of shadows across the prairie. The work of the day is complete for now, and the structure will stand ready for the final covering, waiting for the next phase to begin. The weight of the hide cover. The prepared hide cover is laid out on a flat, dry area near the base of the frame, its edges carefully aligned and secured with smooth, flat stones to prevent shifting in the rising wind. The leather is thick, cool, and uniformly softened by weeks of stretching, fat application, and smoking. Its surface carries a subtle, warm sheen, the result of repeated brushing and the natural curing process, and it releases a faint, clean scent of aged leather and dried wood smoke when disturbed. The man approaches the cover slowly, his hands resting lightly at his sides, observing the way the material settles against the earth without wrinkling or folding. He begins at the rear seam, where the hides have been stitched together into a continuous curved panel. He places his fingers along the top edge, gripping the leather firmly but without excessive tension, and lifts it slowly from the ground. The material rises with a soft, muffled rustle, its weight distributed evenly across his hands and forearms. He carries it toward the base of the frame, positioning it so that the seam aligns with the rear opening. The wind catches the lower edge, causing a brief, gentle flutter before the leather settles back into a steady downward pull.
He does not fight the movement. He allows the air to guide the material into place, stepping back slightly to let the natural weight of the cover begin its descent along the poles. The sound of the leather moving against the wood is quiet and continuous, a soft shh rustle that repeats as the cover slides downward, following the conical curve of the frame. The tactile feedback is steady. The leather feels cool and slightly resilient, conforming to the shape of the poles without resistance or distortion. He moves around the structure, adjusting the lower edges as they reach the ground, ensuring that the cover hangs evenly on all sides. The process is slow and deliberate, governed by the steady pull of gravity and the careful guidance of his hands. There is no rush to complete the task. The cover will settle into its final position gradually, aligning the fibers with the frame through quiet, consistent movement. The air around the workspace remains cool, carrying the faint scent of dry soil and the clean, aged aroma of the leather. The man continues to adjust, his hands moving with calm precision, his focus entirely on the immediate contact between hide and wood. The structure begins to take on the familiar, rounded shape of a completed shelter, the open framework gradually disappearing beneath the continuous panel. The work proceeds without interruption, guided by repetition and the steady rhythm of placement. The cover settles into place, quiet and unchanging, ready for the final securing. The second phase focuses on securing the cover to prevent it from shifting or billowing in the sustained prairie wind. The man gathers a series of thin, flexible wooden pins, each approximately 6 inches in length, carved from supple willow branches and sharpened to a blunt point. He moves along the lower edge of the cover, lifting a small section of the leather and pressing it firmly against the ground. He inserts the first pin at a shallow angle, driving it through the hem of the cover and into the packed soil. The sound is a quiet, muffled thud, followed by the faint rustle of the leather settling against the earth. He repeats the process at regular intervals, spacing the pins evenly around the entire perimeter. The tactile feedback is consistent. The leather yields gently to the pressure of the pin, the fibers compressing slightly without tearing or stretching. He checks the tension by running his hand along the secured edge, feeling for any loose sections or uneven pulls. The texture is uniform, smooth and cool, with no visible gaps or wrinkles along the base. The wind continues to pass across the prairie, but the cover remains firmly anchored, its lower edge held in place by the steady distribution of the wooden pins. The man moves to the rear opening, where the leather is designed to remain unsecured for entry and ventilation. He folds the overlapping seam inward, creating a tight, controlled flap that can be adjusted according to the direction of the wind. The sound of the leather folding is soft and muffled, a quiet shh click as the edges align and settle into place. He steps back to observe the overall alignment, ensuring that the cover hangs evenly from the apex to the base without sagging or pulling too tightly. The conical shape is complete, the seams flush, the tension distributed uniformly across the entire surface. He considers the weight of the material, recognizing that the secure base will allow the upper sections to remain flexible, shifting slightly with the wind without compromising the integrity of the structure. There is no need to rush to the next step. The cover will rest, anchored and steady, while he prepares the interior space. The camp remains quiet, the only movement coming from the slow drift of dust across the open ground and the distant, low hum of wind passing through the grass. The work continues in its own unhurried time, guided by repetition and quiet attention.
As the evening light deepens into a pale, muted blue, the man completes the final adjustments to the exterior cover, ensuring that every seam and edge rests evenly against the frame. He moves slowly around the structure, his hands resting lightly on the leather, feeling for any areas where the tension may be uneven or where the wind might catch a loose fold. The tactile feedback is consistent. The leather feels cool and firm, its surface smooth and slightly resilient under his touch. He presses gently along the rear seam, adjusting the overlapping flap to create a tighter seal against the incoming breeze. The sound of the leather shifting is soft and continuous, a quiet rustle that fades quickly into the still air. He steps back once more, observing the completed exterior, noting how the conical shape holds its form without sagging or distorting. The wind continues to pass across the prairie, but the cover remains steady, its lower edge firmly anchored and its upper sections following the natural curve of the frame. The air around the structure grows cooler as the sun disappears below the horizon, but the interior remains sheltered, protected by the continuous panel of cured leather. The man gathers a small bundle of dry kindling and cottonwood bark, placing it near the rear opening in preparation for the evening fire. He pauses briefly, resting his hand against the cool leather, feeling the quiet stability of the structure beneath his palm. The thought arises that this space, though still empty and open to the night air, already holds the shape of a sanctuary, defined by the careful arrangement of materials and the steady passage of time. He steps inside, his boots settling softly against the packed earth, and looks upward toward the bound apex. The converging lines of the poles create a narrow opening to the sky, a deliberate design that will soon allow smoke to escape while keeping the interior warm and dry. He returns to the exterior, his movements slow and deliberate,
and waits for the final phase to begin. The structure stands complete, quiet and unchanging, ready for the first embers to be lit within. The preparation of the interior fire begins with the careful selection of dry, seasoned wood gathered from the previous day's collection near the edge of the camp. The man kneels at the center of the teepee floor, arranging a small pile of fine twigs and shredded cottonwood bark in a loose circular pattern. The bark is pale and fibrous, catching the low light of the evening sky with a soft, matte texture. He places the material on a shallow, flat stone to prevent the heat from scorching the packed earth beneath, a simple precaution that preserves the ground and contains the ash. The tactile sensation of the bark is light and brittle, crumbling slightly under the pressure of his fingers, releasing a faint woody scent that blends with the clean, dry air inside the shelter. He adds a second layer of thin, split branches, positioning them at opposing angles to create a stable base for the initial flame. The sound of the wood settling against the stone is quiet and muffled, a soft click, followed by a gentle rustle as the pieces align into a balanced arrangement. He does not pack the material tightly. The gaps between the branches allow air to circulate freely, ensuring that the fire will catch quickly without smoldering or producing excessive smoke. The wind outside continues to pass across the prairie, but its sound is muffled within the shelter, reduced to a low, steady hum that moves along the outer leather surface. The man remains still, observing the arrangement, ensuring that the structure is balanced and ready for the spark. He reaches into a small, cured leather pouch at his side and withdraws a piece of iron pyrite and a flat, dried piece of fungus, the traditional tools for creating a slow, controlled ignition. The tactile feedback is steady. The iron pyrite feels cold and dense, its surface rough and slightly metallic, while the fungus is dry and lightweight, crumbling easily at the edges. He places the pyrite on the flat stone beside the kindling, positioning the fungus directly over the center of the pile. The workspace inside the shelter remains quiet, the only movement coming from the slow settling of the wood and the distant, muffled sound of wind passing through the grass. The preparation is complete, guided by repetition and quiet attention. The materials rest in place, ready for the first strike. The ignition process begins with a single, deliberate motion. The man holds the pyrite firmly in one hand and a smooth, hardened piece of chert in the other, angling the stones to create a sharp, glancing impact. The sound is a quick, metallic click,
followed by a faint shower of tiny sparks that scatter downward toward the dried fungus. He does not strike repeatedly. He allows the first impact to settle, observing whether the sparks have caught on the fibrous surface. A small orange ember begins to glow, slow and steady, spreading gradually across the center of the fungus. He places a thin, shredded layer of bark over the ember, folding it gently to enclose the heat while still allowing a small amount of air to enter. The sound of the bark settling is quiet and muffled, a soft rustle that fades quickly into the still air. He waits, his hands resting lightly on his knees, observing the slow growth of the ember as it spreads into the surrounding material. The tactile feedback is steady. The bark feels cool and dry, but a faint warmth begins to radiate upward as the fire takes hold. He does not blow or disturb the arrangement. The fire will catch naturally if the air circulation remains balanced and the materials are sufficiently dry. The ember grows slowly, spreading into the fine twigs, then into the split branches, producing a quiet, continuous crackle as the wood begins to burn. The sound is low and rhythmic, a steady pop and hiss that repeats as the moisture in the wood evaporates and the fibers ignite. The air inside the shelter grows slightly warmer, carrying the clean, familiar scent of burning cottonwood and dried bark. The man steps back slightly, allowing the fire to establish itself, his focus remaining on the steady progression of the flame. There is no need to rush or adjust the arrangement. The fire will burn steadily if left undisturbed, guided by the careful preparation and the balanced airflow. The interior space remains quiet, the only movement coming from the slow rise of smoke toward the apex opening and the distant, muffled sound of wind passing outside. The work continues in its own unhurried time, guided by repetition and quiet attention. As the fire establishes itself, the man adds a few larger split pieces of seasoned lodgepole pine, placing them carefully against the base of the flame. The wood is dry and light, its surface carrying the faint, resinous scent of the same trees that form the frame of the shelter. He positions the logs at opposing angles, creating a stable platform that allows the heat to circulate evenly without collapsing. The sound of the wood settling is a soft, muffled thud, followed by a quiet crackle as the heat reaches the new material. He remains seated beside the fire, his hands resting lightly on his knees, observing the steady progression of the flame as it moves upward and outward. The light inside the shelter grows warmer, casting a pale golden glow against the inner surface of the leather cover. The smoke rises in a slow, steady column toward the apex opening, dissipating into the cool evening air
without accumulating or thickening. The tactile sensation of the heat is gentle and consistent, warming the air without becoming oppressive, creating a quiet, contained atmosphere that contrasts sharply with the cool, moving air outside.
The man considers the long evening ahead, recognizing that this fire will require only occasional adjustment, a steady presence that will maintain the interior warmth through the night. He reaches into his pouch and withdraws a small, flat piece of dried sage, placing it near the edge of the fire, where the heat will slowly release its aromatic oils into the air. The scent is clean and herbal, blending with the wood smoke and the dry prairie air to create a quiet, familiar atmosphere. The interior remains still, the only movement coming from the slow rise of smoke and the gentle flicker of the flame against the leather. The wind outside continues to pass across the prairie, but its sound is reduced to a low, steady hum that moves along the outer surface of the cover. The shelter holds its shape, steady and unchanging, a quiet sanctuary against the cool evening air. The work of the day is complete, guided by repetition and quiet attention. The fire burns steadily, the interior remains warm, and the space waits for the night to begin. The teepee stands complete now, its frame and cover and fire no longer separate efforts, but one quiet whole. Wood that was once 3 loose poles holds the weight of hide that was once raw and heavy. Hide that was once stretched and smoked now keeps the wind outside where it belongs, and the fire, lit from a single spark, fills the space with a low, steady warmth that asks nothing further of the hands that made it. There is no next step waiting. The work that filled these hours has folded itself into something whole and still, the way a day folds into evening. Wherever you are, you can rest now, here in this firelight, in this shelter built by patient hands and held together by nothing more than careful, repeated care. The grassland outside continues in its own cold quiet, and inside the warmth holds, unhurried and complete.